we're in the lab, the new Science of Physical Health lab. I've created this web page that is directly comes from my brand new book called Learn How to Be a Longevity Builder. Learn how to become a longevity builder, which is what the whole channel is about. What I want to do is walk you through in this lab today some screenshots from the website that I've created that is going to be a companion to the book. Now, when I say the website, this book is going to be very, very different. This whole ecosystem about learn how to become a longevity builder is going to be very, very different. I'm going to take sections of the book and organize my team so we're building a series of interactive infographics that relate to a section of the book so that when you get a hold of it, when you're starting to dive into what it is to become a longevity builder, you will have a companion that goes with a book, which I've never seen anywhere else before, a series of interactive, click on, learn some things, take part in a website that is for one section of the book. Then we have another one for a different section. So let's get through today some screenshots of, it's not available just yet, this particular website, it's in build mode because we haven't released the book as a part of the whole Longevity Builder project series. So look at the screenshot next to me. This is the top of the website, the first screen. Hazard ratios. No single intervention is more powerful for longevity. You'll be able to click on that green button. You can do that now when it becomes public and go into a deep dive about what hazard ratios are all about. And as the subtitle says, comparing common health risks. Let's dive into now and work through what this section of being a longevity builder is all about here in the lab and go to the next screen. All right, let's look at this text next to me from the green button, the deep dive green button on the previous page. When you get to the interactive site, this is what you'll get to see once you click on that deep dive button there. Hazard ratios are a fundamental concept in survival analysis, a branch of statistics used extensively in medical research to analyze the time until an event of interest occurs, often referred to as time to event data. This event could be death, disease reoccurrence, recovery from a disease, or any other significant health outcome. So what does a HR hazard ratio represent? It's the instantaneous risk of an event occurring in one group relative to another group or a control group at any given point in time. So let's look at the bottom, just go down to the bottom here where it says interpreting HR values, hazard ratio values. This branch of science that mind-blowingly, I'd never heard of up until the first 36 years of my work in health and physical education. Well, mind you, I don't think many people have, or many teachers would have in my field either. In fact, I don't know of any that I've ever spoken to, and I have interacted with a lot of people in my field. Interpreting hazard ratio values. A HR hazard ratio of 1.0 is neutral. The event rate is identical in both groups. The factor study has no impact on the event rate. If a hazard ratio is greater than 1, there's an increased risk of interference to your longevity, lifespan, or your health span, how long you live without being sick from a disease. For example, something that has a HR value, hazard ratio value of 2.5 for a risk factor means that the group with that risk factor has 2.5 times the event rate, or 150% increased risk compared to the group without it. The next section that we're going to look at from my interactive infographic, which comes from my brand new ecosystem, starting with our book called Learn How to Become a Longevity Builder, that is, next part of it is I'm going to go through a bar graph looking at the most significant risk factors to your longevity and health span. And out of looking at this and applying HR values, we're going to see a number of risk factors here in the bar graph that are greater than 1.0 and will interfere with your longevity and health span if you develop these risk factors. And then we're going to walk backwards from there and go, what is it that we need? What's the number one intervention or risk factor that you and I can use to increase our longevity and health span? What's the one thing that we don't want to have that's more impactful than any other hazard ratio? Wow, let's look at this bar graph right now. All right, this is the bottom of the bar graph. So when you go to the website, when this becomes publicly available, depending on when you're watching this, if there's a link in the notes, it's available. If it's not, then we haven't made it available yet. So, and when I say link in the notes, I pinned in the first comment here on the YouTube channel. Sometimes I think I'm on my audio podcast, The New Science of Physical Health. No, I'm not. I'm on the YouTube channel here. Okay, so the bottom of the bar graph, it says, it's a little bit cut off in this image, but that's okay. If someone is overweight, now there's different levels of overweight, and you'll see further up the scale as you go from the bottom up to the fourth one, it says obesity. There are two different classifications. But if someone's just overweight, the hazard ratio applied to interfering with your longevity, lowering your risk of your lifespan, and also interfering with your health span, how many years you live without sickness and disease interfering with your life. If someone's overweight, epidemiologists throughout thousands of studies have found out, and millions of people, it has a hazard ratio of 1.1 or 10%. That means a person who is overweight has a 10% chance of something negative interfering with their longevity and health span compared to the person who's not overweight. Okay. This one's going to be controversial. Look at the second one on the list in blue. Poor dietary pattern. Two people, a person with very poor eating patterns, and then a person who has got very excellent eating patterns, very healthy, very fresh food, not very much processed food, has a hazard ratio of 1.1, 10%. Now, I say it's controversial. There's a lot of people who go, that's not true. That can't possibly be right. I'll deep dive into that in a complete video learning episode here on the channel by itself, because I really do want to dive into that. There's a lot to that one to unpack. We won't do that here. Poor sleep. If you're a person who thinks that, well, I've got to improve my sleep, I want to improve my longevity, because here's the purpose of this graph. Every one of these is a factor that can either increase your longevity if you look after it, or decrease your longevity and health span if you don't look after it. So a lot of people go, well, I better get my sleep right. I want to work on my sleep. That's a factor. But how powerful a factor is it? 1.1, 10%, has a hazard ratio of 10%. So far, we're not looking at things that are at the top of the graph that are the most powerful lever that science has ever found. Very interesting. Well, 10%. Let's keep going. If someone's in classified, let's move up now to elevated LDL cholesterol, which I mentioned a second ago. That has a hazard ratio of 1.2. If you have, or you know people who have elevated low-density lipoprotein cholesterol above, let's say it's in Australia, we measure it in millimoles, 4.6, 4.7, 5. If it's that high, you have a 1.2 hazard ratio, 20% increased risk interfering with longevity and health span. Sedentary, if you're a person who is, same thing. If you're not very active, you don't use the correct dose of physical activity, you have a 20% hazard ratio. Excessive alcohol consumption, the same, right? That's the first part of the bar graph when you get to the website. Wait till you see the next slide and see what is the actual most impactful hazard ratio that science has ever found. On the graph in blue, first of all, get your eyes down there. Elevated insulin, 1.3 or a 30% hazard ratio. Move it up. High blood pressure, 1.3, 30% hazard ratio. These things are important. You need to tackle these things. They're very important. But here's what I contend as being a longevity builder, what's important. There are so many things that you could try to do to improve your health outcomes, to improve your longevity, improve your health span. Heaps of things. All the things on this list and other things. But what I encourage you to do, encourage you to learn about, which is what my whole project of longevity building is all about, after all the years of me teaching health and physical education since way back in 1985, for those of you who have never met me before, and also my last 5 years of interviewing and working with and consulting with more than 100 PhDs, both clinicians and practicing doctors from around the world on my audio podcast, The New Science of Physical Health. This is where I've been able to learn and find out, which I never knew about before. Someone has type 2 diabetes. It has a hazard ratio of 1.5. Just clarify this again. If you have type 2 diabetes compared to a person who doesn't have type 2 diabetes, you have a 50% greater chance of there being a health catastrophe and something interfering with shortening your lifespan, longevity, and also your health span. Smoking has a hazard ratio of 2.0. If you're a smoker, That's the only news I've got to say. It has 100% impact compared to the person who doesn't smoke of something interfering with your longevity and your health span. That's what we know from all of the epidemiological studies. Low strength has a hazard ratio of 2.3, 130%. Wow. So a person, as you move through the decades, you incrementally lose strength. What's interesting is it's the second largest hazard ratio we know, as one that I concentrate on at my age of 59. You should too, regardless of your age. But look at the top one. Look at how far above your oxygen efficiency is compared to, in terms of measured by your VO2 max, in comparison to the person who doesn't have a high VO2 max or has a poor oxygen efficiency. Now, we're not going to define oxygen efficiency and VO2 max in this particular video episode, other than to say it's your body's capacity to transport oxygen that you breathe in from the air through your lungs to your heart, your blood vessels, and out to your muscle cells. And there's a whole lot of functions that oxygen is required for. So a low VO2 max, a person with poor oxygen efficiency, as classified for their age and gender, compared to a person with high oxygen efficiency, a high VO2 max, has a hazard ratio of 5.0. A person who's in the bottom 25% compared to for their age and gender with their VO2 max, that person doesn't use the correct dose of physical activity on any regular basis, compared to a person who's in the top 2.5% for their age and gender. Bottom 25%, top 2.5%. So I was in the bottom 25%, and I incrementally worked my way up to be in the top 2.5% for my age and gender. We've got some tables that are available. We have them available on this website, and we'll have them available in the book and some other part of our content. And it has a hazard ratio of 5.0, 400% difference from the person in the top 2.5% to the bottom 25%. These people who have a low oxygen efficiency score as measured by their VO2 max, compared to those top people, it's not hard to incrementally climb your way up, learn how to become a longevity builder, and raise your VO2 max, improve your oxygen efficiency. If you're going to use a lever, why use, this is my question to you. Think about, you answer this for yourself. If you're going to use a lever to improve your health span and your longevity, and then you've got in front of you 25 different things that you could try and concentrate on to help improve those things, why would you not use the one that has been proven, or the two? I use the top two. Use those more than anything else. Well, here's the interesting part. You'll find out as we move through over the next year, as I'm building out the Longevity Builder series and all the tools that go with that, your education tools, I've got a great technology coming with it too. I shouldn't have said that. Got a great technology coming with it. That's all I'll say with the Longevity Builder. Oh, there goes the phone. Well, we'll leave that in there. Didn't realize that was turned on. In fact, I'll just turn that off while we're here in the lab. Shouldn't have had that. It's a text message from my wife. She's out at the moment. Okay, back to this. Why wouldn't you use the biggest lever? Why would you use all 25? Here's the interesting point I was going to get to before that text message went off. If you use the top one that has a hazard ratio of 400%, compared to the top 2.5% and to the bottom, in that bottom quartile, top 2.5 quartile, or not quartile, top 2.5 down to the bottom quartile in your score, because you can score your oxygen efficiency. Those, if you use it, it cascades down over all the other ones. I'll say that again. You want to lower your risk from morbid obesity, lower your risk from type 2 diabetes, severe obesity, high blood pressure, elevated insulin. You want to lower your risk from those. Use the top one, and the impact of that will cascade over all the others. I won't go into more about that right now, why that is from a science point of view, from an internal molecular and physiological health adaptation perspective. I'll do that later on, some other video series for you. But suffice to say, this hazard ratio table, most mind-blowing thing I'd ever heard in health education, and I only learned it a few years ago. I only found out about it a few years ago. Can't wait to share more about it and dive into it, not just here today on this particular episode, but as we build out the education ecosystem related to being a longevity builder. Our next screenshot of the website that we're going to release here around hazard ratios. Look at this. After 40, age 40, nearly every adult's oxygen efficiency score plummets. This is the number one threat to your longevity. No question about it. Look at the graph, the vertical axis. I don't know which is X and Y. I'm not a mathematician. You mathematicians are looking at me or listening to this and watching this particular channel going, come on, it's easy. No, I'm not a mathematician. Look at the vertical axis. VO2 max in milliliters per kilogram per minute. What happens is when you're younger, your VO2 max, your oxygen efficiency score is naturally higher. But it could be around, between 40 and 50. That's what you should have in your 20s, because you look at the horizontal axis. Somebody put a post in the comments, which is the x-axis and which is the y-axis. And I know that's simple, but it's not something I store in my brain because I'm a health and physical education teacher. So look down the bottom. A person in their 20s, in the decade, if you're in your 20s, listen to this. You should have an oxygen efficiency score somewhere between 40 and 50. If you don't use the correct dose of physical activity, by the time you hit your 30s, that's dropped into the low 40s. By the time you hit your age 40 or you're in your 40s in that decade, if you're watching this right now, if you don't use the correct dose of physical activity, it's dropped into the 30s. Look, and we continue to go along. You get into your 50s, the average person in their 50s who does not use the correct dose of physical activity, theirs has declined to in the mid-20s, thereabouts. Could be lower, could be a bit higher. Then you get into your 60s, it's even lower. Then you get in your 70s, it's even lower. Is this graph a fait accompli? Not if you use the correct dose of physical activity, not if you learn how to become a longevity builder, which is what my whole project is going to be focused around from now on. So I had the opportunity last year, as I record this a year from ago, to sit down with one of the world's leading PhDs, a research professor, Professor Ulrik Wisloff from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. He was over from Norway here in Australia doing some a year-long research sabbatical in Queensland, one of our states. And he flew down to speak at a conference here in Sydney, and I was so lucky to meet with him and Dr. Atefe Tari, also from the university. Professor Wisloff is from the Faculty of Medicine and specifically leads the Cardiac Exercise Research Group at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Phenomenal research professor for years. Got awarded a medal from the King of Norway for services to heart health because of his research. It's like, you start looking up and I dive into it in my book and the Longevity Builder series that's coming out over the next year. I dive into his background and it's phenomenal. Part of his research is what you see on the screen here. Using the correct dose of physical activity with the tools that we're going to provide with Longevity Builder is discover the transformative health outcomes you can achieve. This is phenomenal. This is on the site. I'll just look at this. Heart attack, a 41% reduction in clinical risk. The word clinical is so important because these are not just numbers plucked out of the air. They are numbers, the data that Professor Wisloff and his team of researchers at the university, there's about 55 staff and his faculty, the Cardiac Exercise Research Group, have put together through their research. It's global research focused there in Norway of the world's biggest heart study and a whole lot of other stuff that Professor Wisloff has been doing for the last 20, 25 years. He's a preeminent researcher. Obesity, 30% using the technology and using the correct dose of physical activity, raising incrementally your oxygen efficiency score, you get a 30% reduction in clinical complications from obesity. Type 2 diabetes. This one, when he sent me a slide on an email once a few years ago about this, I'm blown away. 54% decrease in complications from type 2 diabetes. Whoa. Dementia, a 50% reduction. Dr. Atefe Tari, who I mentioned, from the university, works with Professor Wisloff for him and for his group. She studies in this area of dementia and Alzheimer's. 50% reduction in risk of getting this disease if you incrementally increase your oxygen efficiency score. Depression, 26% lower risk of developing it. High blood pressure, that's a bad disease. 30% less complications from that. Cancer risk, 15% less risk of diagnosis. Premature death, 61% less total risk. And a heart bypass surgery, 22% reduction in risk of surgery. These are just some of the health adaptations that you can experience by using the ecosystem we're putting together here. It's going to start with the book, Longevity Builder. Learn how to become a longevity builder. All right, there's a lot more to this interactive website that goes with the book, Longevity Builder, that will be coming out with the book I'm giving you a preview of today here in the New Science of Physical Health Lab. There's a lot more to this than what I'm showing you now. This is the last slide I'll finish on here, the AQ engine, and then we'll go back on location and wrap up this video episode. The AQ engine, powering your health adaptations. The AQ engine is a metaphor for how your body upgrades itself, improving your VO2 max and your exercise with the right heart rate intensity are key inputs in this the fuel in the engine. I put together this graphic, this framework diagram, if you like. I like doing these little kind of doodle diagrams. I think they're fantastic. So this is from the work that I'm doing with the Longevity Builder ecosystem, the education. This will go into our online classroom, I think, that we're going to have with it. The AQ engine stands for Activity Quotient Points. It's work that comes from Professor Wisloff and a technology from his team that I work with in Norway. On one side of the engine, you put in, if you want to have a great engine, great longevity. If you want to have great health span, great engine. You put incrementally increase your oxygen efficiency as measured by your VO2 max over time, using the correct heart rate intensities across a 7-day span. We've got technology to help you do this, by the way, in the Longevity Builder series. And that's called the AQ engine. You put those two things in. What you get out of it is reduced risk of disease, improved longevity, and a decrease in inflammation in your body. So I just want to touch on that because there's a lot more to the activity quotient engine, the AQ engine. But this is just, and there's some other interactive stuff on the site that's below this. All right, everybody, I've touched on things here in the lab. You're going to get access to this. Stay tuned on the channel for when this gets released. Can't wait to share this with you. And I'm going to go back now on location and finish and wrap up and tell you more about what's coming with longevity. I'll be doing some physical activity somewhere, or I have finished a session and then I'll do some recording and we package it up here and put it together here on the channel. All right, everybody, thanks for joining me here at the New Science of Physical Health Lab. See you on location just a moment.
We don't have a single metric of humans that we can measure that better predicts how long they will live than how high their VO2 max is. And it's not even close, to be completely clear. So to be clear, if you take a 35-year-old man and one of them has a VO2 max of 53 and the other one has a VO2 max of 35, there is a 400% difference in their all-cause mortality over the coming year.